Welcome to this edition of the Trekzone Spotlight. Joining me fresh from his weekend at Salt Lake Comic Con and the broadcast premiere of Star Trek Discovery last night, it's the founder of Portal 47, Dr. Trek himself, Mr. Larry Nemecek. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Well, thank you, Matt. That was some lead-in, but thank you. It's been quite a week for everybody.
How excited are you? We've finally got Trek back on TV after 12 years, 4 months and 11 days.
But what is that precisely? No, I know. It's as much as we're all talking about Discovery and what that's doing for Star Trek, just the fact that we're finally out of the desert. In fact, it hit me. I blogged about this at my Trekland blog. That opening shot from the pilot, no spoilers, of them wandering in the desert and then going home, I thought, well, that's a perfect metaphor for all of Star Trek and the Star Trek fandom family, right? That we've all been wandering right in the desert for 12 years.
And it does feel good. Those opening shots in Jordan were absolutely spectacular. You can tell that a lot has changed. And I think that by now, every Trekkie that's watching us here on the podcast has seen the show. Mm-hmm. So let's get as spoilerific as we can.
Okay.
But those opening shots were absolutely incredible. The opening scene, the development between Captain and Number One was especially gratifying. Mm-hmm. What were your thoughts?
No, I did too. And I would just say that they filmed that in Jordan, those desert scenes. Now, it is a pilot, and they are spending millions of dollars on the show, and we're on a level above Next Generation era, which was on a level above the 60s. But I don't think they're going to go film in Jordan every week, is my point. You splurge on a pilot, right, and get all your costs out. But no, it was good. It was great to see Georgiou and Burnham's characters, and then Saru also, who's going to be, now apparently Georgiou will not be. Hope we're not being too spoilery here. So I've heard this 2 hours being called a prologue. A prologue pilot, and the ground will shift a little bit with episode 3 forward, and we've seen this. Voyager's pilot was a little bit that way too, right? We saw the initial setup, and then that ended with the situation that actually set up the rest of the series, and in a certain way, I can see this being the same way too.
I don't think we've seen a Star Trek series where we've. I was just about to say that I don't think we've seen a Star Trek series where the ship in the pilot has been destroyed. But I've just realised that in Deep Space Nine, of course, the Saratoga was destroyed. But I don't think it was built up so much as the ship of the series necessarily, was it?
Well, right, and we're about to see, since the whole world saw that little featurette reel at the end, the coming attractions, we're about to see a commander pluck someone from, being in prison again and being rehabilitated, which we saw with Paris and Janeway in Voyager's pilot. But again, what you just said, not explored to this extent, not used as a major story point. So there's a lot of little touches and homages all through this pilot in this series. And I think they're going to be more and more apparent, right? Yeah,
well, fingers crossed. Some of the sound effects were absolutely lovely to hear again in an official production. The bridge sounds, some of the comm channel chirps and all that sort of stuff. It feels like we're back and we're home with Star Trek again.
I think so. There were a lot of home touches. Now, I've had some people grumble, well, that was a chime from Next Generation. But we can smooth that out. I think we're fine. The fact that they were doing that shows a lot of the heart. Because it's hard to, we've been saying the last few months, you go back and look at the records, the historical documents, before Next Generation, even before the Wrath of Khan, every iteration of Star Trek has had, fans are so passionate that it verges into fear that the new guys, whoever they are going to muck it up, right? And it even gets into anger a little bit. And so we've seen, I call that the loud 10%. And now that we've got the internet and social media to amplify that, it's been more in your face. But I really think the vast majority, the silent majority, the armchair fandoms, the mobile guys fandoms, I think, I just saw a report this morning that the All Access here in the States, the CBS All Access subscriptions have had their spike, their one-day spike. And of course, you're seeing it on Netflix there in Australia and most of the rest of the world. But I think the overall reaction and most of the critical reaction has been sky high too. At least B or above, I think, from most of the critics. So
Yeah, and that's been the thing
yeah.
as well. I'm in a couple of Star Trek groups here in Australia, Austrek and Quest here in Queensland, and there hasn't been so much talk about, as you say, from the vocal 10%, about the design of the Klingons and the Klingon ship and where we've been with the Starfleet ship. It's more been about Star Trek's back. Yay!
Right. Which is so funny because that's my memory as a kid of Next Generation coming back. And I remember people upset that it wasn't the paradigm of Star Trek they understood, which was Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And I was like, shut up, it's new Star Trek. And Gene is running it at the time, right? And what people didn't get, what that was going to do, being 80 years ahead, was simple on paper, but what it did was totally opened up the paradigm of what Star Trek was. It was this universe, not just this ship and these three guys and their crew, but it was this entire milieu now. And the way we think about, world building and cinematic universes and, multiplayer massive games. And set up everything to follow, DS9 and Voyager and Enterprise and even the JJ movies and now Discovery. So some of this is cinematography and, just the gap. But what thrills me is hearing all the younger fans or just newer fans who have never had the experience of having fresh Trek. I almost want to do a hashtag fresh Trek. I have to stop and remember there's a whole generation of fans that Star Trek is just Netflix queues.
Yep.
Or boxes on the shelf. They've never known weekly anticipation for a new episode and all the debate and speculation that goes on with that. And that's such a part of fandom. It's even part of the creative process, especially this creative team. I mean, as Star Trek has gone along, they've always listened. Gene and Bob Justman and Dorothy Fontana read their fan mail, as well as the actors did. But every increasing generation of Star Trek has been tuned in, and with the internet, and this creative team, there's so many Trek fanboys and fangirls in the writer's room, at least, that the feedback is coming thick and fast. And it's going to be interesting to see how the fan reaction dynamic with the creators, unfolds with Discovery, too.
It's interesting there that you mentioned this new generation that hasn't had that weekly anticipation of Trek. My sister's 21, so she was 10 plus for Enterprise, or a little bit younger actually, excuse me. She was just coming up to 10 when Enterprise was first on the air. So I watched her last night when we were watching the show after
You watched her watch it.
Yeah, and it was interesting to see her reactions on some things, and she's been spoilt by Marvel and Netflix dumping the whole season out at once, and that was something that she mentioned. Do I have to wait a whole week for this? I can't deal with the anticipation.
Good.
And that's
because if you didn't care, then something has gone very wrong. No, I realized at the beginning that the dumping generation, it's like, no, that is not what, everybody else does. It's like, but that's the whole point. Star Trek is not like everybody else. All these other we talk about franchises now. Star Trek is its own. Star Trek was the pioneer.
That's right.
Yes, I know Doctor Who was out before Star Trek, but Star Trek showed them how to market. Star Wars followed quickly on the heels of Star Trek. I mean, there were the James Bond movies, there were Tarzan movies, but they were not really franchises the way we think of, and it's certainly nothing that inspired and went into the future and made people passionate. I say Star Trek created the internet with paper and stamps. Nothing created that kind of passion past movie stars and rock singers. An entity. Nothing was like that before Star Trek. And now we're drowning in all these mega franchises and tent poles, and that's fine. But Star Trek is not like everything else in so many ways beyond just being the pioneer. And one of those, I was like, please God, please do not let CBS do a season dump, because that takes away so much from the week to week to week. I'm not just being nostalgic for old TV models. I'm saying that's the best. That's the way fans want. They want to marinade and debate for every week, especially if there's only 15 episodes, right? So I saw some griping about that at the beginning, but I think people get it, that's so much a chunk of the fun of Star Trek if it's being done right. don't you think? I mean, did she grumble? But she's going to come back next week, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was interesting though because she wasn't as excited about the premiere as some of the Marvel series that are out there. But I think that's because that's where she's grown up. There has been this 12-year void of Trek, and being 21, so that makes her 9 when Enterprise last rolled out.
Well, did she really pay attention to Enterprise, or were you just doing math here?
She's now. I
mean, back in the day when she was 9 and 10, did she really watch the show, or are you just remembering how old she was?
I think I think that it was always just there as a TV show, but she is certainly engrossed in it now, and it's fun to watch her watch Next Gen for the first time, and some of these things that I know is coming up, especially in the later seasons, and I'm working on getting her onto Deep Space Nine, but it's a bit of a struggle at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, JJ's movies had a huge effect on reigniting interest, at the same time as the remastered Blu-rays and the Netflix access. That was a revolution. Brought all the interest back to Next Gen and all the spin-offs in the original series, too. So it's going to be interesting to see what that effect, if there's a spike on that again from all new viewers. Because that's the whole point, is making it fresh for a new generation, making a Star Trek that reflects our generation or the current times, both what's going on in the world and what's going on with media, right? And you can certainly say that, I mean, it's sad because people say, oh my God, the production value of this show just blows everything else out of the water. Well, Encounter at Farpoint kind of blew the original series out of the water too, if you wanted to get back to that. And it had to compare a little bit with the films of the time, right? But so every new generation, a plateau of, after there's been a fallow time and a gap, of course things have changed. We always look at the new Star Trek the way we looked at the old, not thinking that 5 or 10 or 15 years have gone by in every aspect, including the way it's made. So all these people say, wow, it's so J.J. Abrams, it's so cinematic. I said today, Twitter, I said, no, it's just 2017, guys.
Yes, I did see that tweet, and it's a very good point. Right. And I think too that I've been catching up on some of the history, as you alluded to there, the fan outcry at when TNG was announced, and how can it not be Kirk, Spock and McCoy, and all of that was really replicated again this time around, and the vocal 10% have really turned into the vocal 1%. A lot of people have seen that these guys that are producing Discovery and working on Discovery have done the right thing, and they've put it in the prime timeline. And sure, it looks like 2017 when everything else was in 1980s and 1990s, but hey, Enterprise blew Next Gen and TOS out of the water as well by its production values. So it'll be really interesting to see how, because the writers have mentioned that we will be getting closer aligned with TOS as the series goes on. It'll be interesting to see how they do that.
Well, a lot of what we talk about, the look of the show, that's just the technology. That's just digital cameras. That's just easy CGI effects where they would love to have done what they did on Enterprise in the early Armus, right? Skin of Evil that killed Tasha. That was such a bear to do, to film around the way they did that as a practical. That would have been so easy as a CGI effect, right? That would have been a no-brainer now. There's so much that where perceptions are colored by, just we forget. And the older fans have their moments of watching even original series and Next Gen and all the succeeding ones. We forget that the world was going by, We're talking about a span of years here, now up to 50, 51. So we bring a lot of that blindedness, those blinders to us when we watch a new show. But the fresh fans who are just now watching this, I don't know if it's better or worse for them because they only know the shows as I said, they're boxes on a shelf or they're, icons in a queue. But wherever we're coming from, we need to stop and remember that we are human beings. There was history going by. We couldn't make original series today. Everybody was doing the best they could. In fact, they were going beyond. Everybody in Star Trek pushed the envelope of their time, right? I mean, the weekly optical effects on the 60s were incredible. You look at them now, and some of the people who are younger or maybe not not thinking about history context. But my God, they had all of Hollywood working on their effects then, busting a gut to do that. And Next Generation pioneered compositing on tape because they couldn't do it any other way. And then, in CG as Voyager and DS9 went along. And Enterprise kind of putting the best of the best by then as far as what they could do on weekly TV. So Discovery is the latest in a long line. We just need to remember not to compare them, up against each other. Remember the time, and then also remember the time that they were all been pioneering. And here's Discovery doing what they do on a weekly basis. I know they were trying to get on an epic Game of Thrones feel, both for respect and audience and an award time. But it's not Game of Thrones never had to do. They had flying dragons, and epic burning fires and crowd scenes, but they never had spaceship battles. And they never had they may have had crowds of Wisterios, but they were all mostly human. They never had to do crowds of Klingons or crowds of Vulcans or Andorians or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So Discovery's going to be pioneering a lot in their own way, that way.
I think we can count ourselves lucky because the other Star franchise that it's created decided to go back into after so many years and create prequels. Of course, I'm talking about Star Wars. We all know what happened with its prequels. I think we should count our blessings that that hasn't happened. The major retcon hasn't happened with a lot of the storylines and the characters. The Star Trek canon is still intact, and Discovery will find its place in there, and there will be some things that'll be changed a little bit, but for the most part, we're back in the prime timeline, and I think that's great to see.
Yeah. Well, I talked a lot about separating concept canon from visual canon, and the minute Brian was announced as the showrunner, I knew he would go prime. I mean, there's really not, since they didn't flesh it out with a series, even an animated series, there's really not a lot of point to the Kelvin timeline except that it's there now, right? I mean, the prime timeline is the one is the biggest skeleton with the most meat on it, and that's the one that people are aware of and are emotionally invested in. It's the most fleshed out. So I knew Brian would go back there, and even though Brian's not hands-on, obviously, that's where half of the staff are good old fanboys and fangirls, and that's where everybody's invested, emotionally and intellectually. As far as that goes, they know what they like, and they know what fans like, and they know what's there to play with, and I don't think they're intimidated. I've heard some writers occasionally say, "Oh my God, it's canon is like a rock around our neck, and if we get one little thing wrong," they've made it. Kirsten Byers on that staff, and Ted Sullivan, and so many of them are old fanboys and fangirls. I'm reusing the phrase over and over again, but it's true. We've had that much of a generation. It was getting to be that way in the Voyager and in Enterprise eras, right? But people get upset about the visual canon and things, and you're trying to saddle a line between creative impulses from designers that want to have a chance to design for Star Trek and work in that, and hewing to the field and not just have things be homages, but have them be, if it's going to be prime, or have we got to a point, 51 years is just too much, and some people have argued this, I've read, it's just too much, we just can't accept, there's no way to deal with the 60s, Shatner, DeForest Kelley, Bob Justman, Matt Jeffries era Star Trek. We have to put that in a little warp bubble, I've even heard people say, and just decide that we're looking at that through some kind of rosy colored glass, and we have to update the 60s look. But I would just offer that design is not the same as cinematography, and that we can have both. And yes, I've heard murmurs and mumbles and rumors that we will get back to more the 60s look, the 60s of the 22 60s. Before things are done here. So I'm anxious to see how that is, but I kind of go, on a couple of things, the consoles and the uniforms, but I know that this is a show with forward momentum, and they're already talking about what they want to do in a second season. They haven't been officially greenlit. And so far, CBS corporately seems to be happy with the business end of things. I know Netflix is thrilled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are three things that as a fanboy, I want to nitpick, and we know what they are. They're at least one of them. They're the Klingon design. There's also that spaceship battle, or the starship battle, at the Binary Stars, and also those uniforms. Firstly, to the Klingons. What are seeing them now in the flesh and fully color graded and everything like that? How are you feeling towards the Klingons?
See, the Klingons, to me, of all the things that people have had reservations about, the Klingons to me are fine because I thought they were ripe for some species diversity, and I thought they were ripe for fleshing out the whole, the Klingon race shouldn't be monolithic. And there's been so little time in a TV budget or a 2-hour movie to do that unless it really became a focus. And I'm fine. I mean, there's some throwback to ancient Klingons here, so I'm fine. I've even heard some kind of rumbles that we may see some of our more familiar looking Klingons, because you've seen the pilot. There's supposed to be, now they've said that there are 24 houses, that they are on planets throughout, the Empire, coming from stellar cartography, the Empire is big. Everything did not originate from Kronos and spread out, or if it did, it's been hundreds of years. So they've been around for, a few thousand. What's interesting is the backstory they developed, apparently, that the Klingons have been, we saw the 100 years between Kirk and Picard, that the Romulans had kind of withdrawn from galactic affairs, at least the Federation. Of course, they were still, bumping heads with the Klingons, like Narendra 3 and the Khitomer raid and all that. But we apparently hear the century between Archer and Kirk, the Klingons have been withdrawn, and we're seeing the rumblings of the modern, which fits in canon. There's really, after Archer's run-ins, there's been nothing, not even any retro flashbacks in the other series. So they picked a great time to, that all fits. And it's more, I have a phrase, texture, not trivia. It's, if something comes in a little bit against the grain, it's not, oh, they got that wrong. It's, well, let's make that the point that proves the exception that proves the rule, right? Let's have that be some wonderful texture, because nothing in life is symmetrical. Nothing is all smooth and by the book, right?
Well, and the Klingons certainly haven't been the same design throughout the whole franchise, have they?
Well, right. And we find, it took 25 years to explain the smooth heads. When there was a faction, people going, oh, it's just different budgets. Just give it up. Quit, being so anal about the smooth head original series Klingons. It's like, no. And good on Manny, Kodo and Mike Sussman for finally coming up with a way to do that wasn't so clunky. And then it was a springboard for other stories, which again, something that seems wrong at the beginning can be texture, that now it's a springboard for more ideas. And you completely wound up with the Dr. Soong line in Enterprise after that, where the forehead ridge with the Klingons came out of the Dr. Soong storyline. But my point is that the Klingons are a huge empire, second in size, in space volume to the Federation, and there's plenty of room. There's plenty of room to go in there and make them more diverse. And we may yet see some Klingons that we're more familiar, Klingons with hair, that we're more familiar with. All it is just variations on how the spine comes up into the ridges. I mean, that was the uniforms, and again, I can see an evolution from the blue of Archer's time. I just was a little queasy about them being so close to Kirk's, turtlenecks and pajama tops. Yeah. But then again, supposedly in canon time, we went from the red, gold, blue within 2 years to the pastels of motion picture, and that's a huge design change within 2 years.
Well, I was going to say that too about the uniform. Star Trek's not afraid to change it up and change the uniforms. The Next Generation spandex jumpsuits from Next Gen's season 1 and 2 changed in season 3 for the main cast into the more familiar design that we're aware of. The jumpsuit, the grey turtlenecks for DS9 and Voyager were introduced to the TNG crew in Generations. So, the uniform is sort of an ever-evolving thing and could necessarily, possibly, be ship-specific, depending on the mission of the ship. If they're exploring, maybe they're a little bit more casual.
That was the original explanation for the jumpsuits in DS9. I mean, visually, they wanted something that looked different than the ship suits of the uniforms from Next Generation, but the point was they were on a station, and it was looser, and it wasn't a completely Federation place, and that was the original backstory for those uniforms. But the other wacky thing is, we have production and we have canon time. So motion picture was 10 years after the original series finished filming, but in canon timeline, it was 2.5 years. And then Wrath of Khan was 2 years after the motion picture in real filming time, but it was, 15 years later in timeline time. So it kind of caught up the reality for the actors, aging that way. But then you see that the Monster Maroons, right, that came in with Wrath of Khan, that was always the go-to old uniform of the past, all through Next Generation. So apparently the Monster Maroons, the spandex of the motion picture pastels were only used for a limited amount of time, but then the Monster Maroons were around for 80 years. So Starfleet's fickle. They just get into. They're like everything else. And again, there's you some texture that's not pretty and perfect, but it gives you a clue to what's going on with the Star Trek universe, and you can even build stories out of that. So I'm happy with the thing. I'm fine with the one that gives me pause are the advanced touchscreen blue consoles. But I even have a feeling that that may be, I don't know, what are they going to find out that those cause cancer, so they had to abruptly pull back? I don't know.
Could it be Tom Paris?
Who knows?
Tom Paris's explanation for the Delta Flyer, where he was sick of the touchscreen controls and wanted to get back to the feeling of flying a ship. Mm-hmm. Where he said that when they created the Delta Flyer, and that's why all the knobs and levers were in there.
Right, and that was 100 years even further on. So
that's right. So there's anything. The writers could really come up with anything. As you say, there could be some brain-sucking parasite that's been living in all of these liquid crystal displays on Starfleet ships for 50 years, and they've been losing ships left, right, and centre.
Maybe that's what the wacky mushroom science mystery of Discovery is going to be.
It's very possible. Well, look,
there's something going on with that. That's obviously a plot that's going to, unspool as we go along.
Well, with ideas like ours, I don't know why we're not on the writing staff, Larry.
Well, I do, but I'll be happy to write memos anytime. Right?
Well, all right. Let's to the third thing that I noticed in the pilots, or in the prelude, as it might be called, the phaser rifles, the phase cannons, the phasers. We're shooting bullet-like objects instead of phased particle beams. What do you think?
Well, and the same thing with the ships. When the ships got into battle, they were pew, pew, pew lines. And that's if there's anything in this that feels JJ-ified, Abrams, Kelvin-versed, it's that. Out of everything that happened and what people have been going on about for the last few months as the promos came out, I watched, one of my early reactions was, I miss phaser beams.
Yes.
But that's a small thing. That's a small thing. But I would love to see somewhere. Maybe that's a technology thing too.
Well, it's very
because they, at the cage was laser pistols, so we're all in a fuzzy place there anyway. So,
well, it was very interesting too because the episode 2 that I saw, Netflix gave me media screeners, so I saw it ahead of the Netflix release, which was 5:00 yesterday afternoon, and it was interesting because it was a locked edit, but it wasn't a final sound effects design. And all of the torpedoes and all of the phasers that were being fired were all the classic next-gen sound effects. So you had a that big green Klingon torpedo being fired from the sarcophagus ship, and it had the sound of Martok's Negvar from DS9. And I thought, that's awesome, until I reread the opening clapper, which said that it wasn't a final sound effects design. I watched the final version last night and realised that they had changed it up, which is probably for the best because, of course, if you have that sound effect with different styles, there's going to be that vocal 10% screaming bloody murder once again.
Right. Well, and you're 100 years apart from that, so what? It's not like people invent sounds, but what is a sound? The technology creates its own, it's like what a prop plane from 1910 sounds different than a prop plane from 1950, right? It
would be like
a jet from
putting a jet engine on a prop on the Wright brothers plane for a sound effect.
But I'm saying propeller planes in 1940 sounded, World War II planes sounded differently than World War I planes, right? Even though they were all propellered planes. Early jets and modern jets sound differently. So, and that's only a span of decades. And if look at the pace of technology change the last 30, 40, that's what's so interesting to me and a lot of people, the concept of Discovery being 10 years before Kirk, whatever they did with it, just people were upset that concept, that old meme about Star Trek should always go forward, not backwards. I'm fine with prequels. I love prequels because to me it's all filling out the gaps in this wonderful tapestry of a universe. But one of the problems of going post-Nemesis has our real cultural, scientific, technological, and media production world advanced enough to do it justice? And, you could say that 1987 was 20 years after 1969, basically, and the world had changed, thematically, culturally, scientifically, media-wise, you could give it a century's difference due, 80 years due. Have we really got the point where we could I mean, I think cinematographically, in budget-wise, what we're able to do, the bang for the buck that they're able to deliver with CG and the way things are shot and filmed and the green screen, and the depth and the epic feel that you're able to deliver on a smaller budget, that's been on a curve. The next generation could do so much more than the original series could. We are there compared to that, but are we to the point where we can really deliver and really do justice to another 80 or 100 years of Star Trek time going by, when we're only just starting to grasp how our own culture and technology is on a compressed wave, right? So like, how fast will things change in their time? I mean, we've already got these benchmarks of seeing, well, this is the Kirk era and this is the Picard era, 100 years apart, and here's what changed. Oh, they went from flip-top communicators to touch badges, sometime in Jack Crusher's time, 20 years before. But now we're learning more about our own pace of change. How does that translate into trying to keep Star Trek viable as a storytelling? I, for one, would rather have more time go by in our real world before we go forward. And I know that's an anathema. That sets some people's hair on fire who want to see new Star, new as in beyond Nemesis, like the era of, and Star Trek Online, the game. Oh my God, they're so canon specific and canon attentive. They're wonderful, and they've gone 50 years into the future past what we saw in the prime time in the first JJ movie with the Kelvin and the Hobus superstar, the supernova that blew up Romulus. They're trying to sketch that out in the future, and they're game, and they're not having to worry about so much the pace of change, and have so much micro-focus spotlight put on them. But that's going to be something if we go beyond, and I don't mean to get off on that here, but that's one thing that's safe about going back to a prequel, but it's just like with Enterprise. It's a hard thing to be more primitive than something you saw 30 years ago or 20 or 10 years ago, right? And there's a big debate on how to do that, and they're still debating that, with the touch screens, and the holo viewer was something else I kind of go about, but
yeah, that was an interesting one, especially the way that the characters interacted, the characters that were appearing as holograms interacted.
Right.
I love
walking over and sitting on the desk.
Sorry?
Yeah. I said when he walked over and sat on her desk.
Yes. Yeah, there was that one there from Sarek, and then there was also the one with the Admiral on the bridge, how he was interacting with the crew on the bridge, and then actually, my sister actually pointed it out that he should have the Admiral's signal on the Klingon ship should have been a lot more distorted and degraded because it was a hologram of a hologram. So the Shenzhou was transmitting him to the Klingon ship, but he was being beamed from the Europa. So it should have been a hologram of a hologram of a hologram. But there's those things.
It wouldn't be the first time we've quibbled with those things either. It's not like they invented trivia quibbling or nitpicking.
Well, that's exactly right.
But the main thrust of the show is incredible and awesome. And the big thing is here, stepping back. CBS is trying to step up. They're trying to step up to the plate. And sometimes I think fans don't get this. But in this era of the huge franchises, I mean, fans want to see, fans want to walk in to Target and Walmart and whatever your department store is and see Star Trek action figures on sale right alongside those Star Wars ones. Why can't we buy Star Trek stuff?
Yes.
And part of that is the perception of retailers and buyers and the mainstream public of where that is in the scheme of things, right? Where it is in the cultural landscape. And CBS and Paramount are very cognizant of trying to step up Star Trek and have a seat at the big boys table of all the franchises. And one of those ways right now in the moment is playing on the same field that Game of Thrones is, because that's the big audience, cultural conversation driver, epic show. And it's on a streaming, so they're trying to, not to be Game of Thrones, but to have that same space and that same gravitas and pick up new people who, if they're not impressed by Star Trek or they're totally unaware of what Star Trek is about, they're impressed by that gravitas and that, I should go check out Star Trek. And that's what they're hoping. And in the After Trek talking show, that's what's been done with all the other big epic shows that have nothing to do with optimism and the Roddenberry vision in space and respect for science and inspiring people into careers. That's not what The Walking Dead or Game of Thrones, either one, are about. But having that clout of numbers and then eventually finding, because Trek will find its way to inspire people, just like the new JJ viewers found the old series, right? And I'm sure lots of new viewers who are coming to Discovery are going to go back and find all the Prime shows, which, aside from being a nice corporate thing, is good for us fans, because that will mean more Trek. And that's the ultimate thing, is the people who aren't buying, I mean, I get it if people can't afford Netflix or they can't afford All Access or the channels in Canada. But, you know, the bottom line is commerce, just like as it was with the Blu-rays. The current line is not enough next generation remastered Blu-rays sold to justify, at this time, a DS9 or Voyager set. And maybe that will change, and maybe the cost point and the technology will get cheaper and things will change. But for right now, that's the status quo. And people vote with their clicks and their likes, and they vote with their dollars still. So, when I see people talking about, well, I like the show, but I'm holding off for now. Well, that's like the people that held off seeing Nemesis on the first weekend, and there was no second weekend in a lot of markets when Nemesis came out. So, just remember that everybody's got their own situation, I know, but we are still living in 2017 in more than cinematic terms. Yeah. And that's the business reality. So, I would just say, everybody, sign up wherever you are if you want to do more, because they can't elaborate on this series, they can't do more series unless, and we're so blessed to have these people doing this show right now and doing an episodic series versus just movies. I mean, we've said that for years. Trek is really home now on small screen in episodic, don't you think?
Absolutely. Well, look, and I think too, Larry, that, we're fans, and this is why I've gone in depth for the better part of a half hour here with you and picking apart some of the things that are a bit scratching, that make you scratch the head a little bit. But at the end of the day, as you said, Star Trek is home. We're back on the small screen. We have to say the small screen now because it's not on TV. But it is on TV because of all those streaming devices.
Screen, but right. No, yeah, the bottom line is Trek is back. This is Trek. This is canon-made Star Trek. It's awesome, has a huge budget behind it. It has a very attentive crew, not just writers, but designers who are very cognizant. And there's some veterans who are working on behind the camera, too, as well, beyond the writers. My friend John Eves is ship designing. And it had Next Generation had an interesting start. The motion picture after that gap sure had a rough start, behind the camera getting going, as we all know. So it's hard to start up a well-oiled machine from scratch after a long time. And people were nervous about that end of Discovery too. And when Brian Fuller, left, and what's going to happen? The delays mean something bad. And even they're not letting anybody review it ahead of time. That must be bad. It's like, no, this is a subscription-driven product. They want to preserve that. They had enough confidence in the product, I think, because all the reviews I've seen from legit reviewers, we're fans sitting here talking, and the fan reviewers have been sky high too, but the legit mainstream reviewers, like I said, I think it's been B plus level at least, or an A. And it's a pilot, right?
That's right.
You always cut pilots a little bit of slack if you can see all the roots and the gems of things to come. And they've all said that, just wait. Episode 3 is almost like a second pilot because it's her new life and new situation with Lorca and the, some old faces like Saru are going to be on the Discovery, and all the new, Cadet Tilly and Paul Stamets and all these other characters that are going to be fresh part of the weekly. And I'm just going to throw one thing out there. I have no idea what's going on here, but remember, Captain Georgiou took a hit, and she was crying about it, and before she could do anything more, or even physically scan her, technologically scan her, she got beamed away and had to leave her there, right?
And I did notice too that in the court-martial,
I'm just saying,
when Michael was talking there, she stopped short when she said the ship was in ruins. My captain, my friend. And that was it. She didn't finish that. We don't know what's happened to her. And my sister has said that she's actually credited. Michelle is credited as a special guest star for the entire season. So is that a plot line that's coming back?
Maybe she's a prisoner in a Klingon camp somewhere. Who knows? And no, I have no idea. I'm totally speculating here. So don't, and if I'm completely right, CBS, please do not come shoot me, okay? I'm not spoiling you can't spoil what you don't know.
Exactly right. You can catch Larry on his website, larrynemecek.com. His Trekland Tuesday live commentary at 6 a.m. Australian Eastern Time. That's 8 p.m. GMT. And at Portal 47 as well. You're a busy man, Larry, and I always appreciate your time.
Thank you. And everybody, LarryNemecek.com, that's the hub of everything in Trekland and Portal 47 too. So thanks for having me, Matt.